Well, hello, welcome to our webinar. This is a webinar sponsored by APIX Inland Empire, which is also now known as ASCM Inland Empire. We are the Association for Supply Chain Management, and this is part of the Emerging with Supply Chain Strength webinar series, so that we all are able to better navigate these interesting supply chain waters we're in these days. And it's sponsored by LMA Consulting Group. And I'm Lisa Anderson, president of LMA Consulting Group, but also president of APIX Inland Empire, or ASCM Inland Empire Chapter. So happy to be here today with Patrick Daly, who's our speaker. He's going to talk about a topic we've been looking at bringing someone in on for quite a while now. So we're really excited to have Patrick with us today to talk about the supply chain in the EU and changes with Brexit and how that's going to affect us in the US and some of our global operations. So Patrick Daly is founder and managing director of Alba Consulting, a business consultancy focused on international supply chain, logistics, and operations based in Dublin, Ireland. Patrick is an accomplished consultant, speaker, trainer, author, and broadcaster, and has been active in the logistics sector for over 25 years. He works with many top Fortune 500 companies in manufacturing, distribution, and logistics services in Europe, Asia, and the Americas, helping them to achieve dramatic improvements in their supply chain capabilities and performance through supply chain excellence. Patrick has worked with clients all over the world, including China, India, Uruguay, Puerto Rico, Egypt, UAE, United States, UK, Spain, Croatia, and many others. So he's very much an expert in these topics, and we know each other through the Society for the Advancement of Consulting, and we're both a part of the global special interest group on supply chain. So we know each other well, and he's definitely an expert on this topic. So we're going to do a bit of a Q&A today. So we'd be interested in your questions from the audience as well. So please add them to the chat or the Q&A, and I will intersperse them in our process. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. So Patrick, maybe you could give us a little bit of background on, I guess, level set, if you will, the playing field here a bit. Maybe tell us, we're largely familiar, I think, with that something has gone on in Europe and that Brexit is happening, but we've also been heads down in supply chain. So if you could explain a little bit about what Brexit is and the terms of that agreement, and what does that mean, so we can start there, that would be great.
Well, I guess in the simplest terms is the United Kingdom has left the European Union, but not only has it left the European Union, it has chosen a form of Brexit that has also taken it out of the single European market and the European Customs Union. And the reason I mentioned the distinction is that leaving the European Union didn't mean that they had to leave those two other aspects of Europe, but they chose to, because there are countries in Europe that are members of the Customs Union, but are not members of the European Union. And there are also countries that are members of the European single market, but are not members of the European Union. And all of these things have important implications for trade and for supply chains. So if you wish, well, maybe explain. So the European Union is a union now of 27 countries. It used to be 28 before the UK left. And these are a set of countries that have come together and have pooled their sovereignty in certain ways, and they do many things in common. those 27 countries also sit at the core of the single European market. And the single European market is made up of those 27 countries plus a few others that are not actually in the European Union, like Iceland and Liechtenstein and Norway and Switzerland. And the single market is a bit like the United States, except that, you know, the United States is a sovereign entity, and it's also a single market. The European Union is a different kind of a beast, but there's a number of those small countries have chosen to be part of the single market, but it means that they are rule takers, in the sense that the European establishes rules for the free movement of 4 fundamental things, which are goods, capital, services, and people. So if you're a member of the single market, whether or not you're a member of the European Union, you accept those free movements. So Norway, for example, which is not in the European Union, is in the single market and accepts the free movement of goods, capital, services, and people. The United Kingdom chose not to have that. So they left the European Union and they left the single market. Also, then they left the customs union. So the customs union also includes the 27 EU members, but includes some other countries as well. Small countries like Monaco, Andorra, San Marino, and some other small territories around the place. But also, very importantly, it includes a very large country, which is not in the European Union, which is Turkey. And the customs union is important because it allows for the tariff-free movement of goods within that area. So if you're an American company or an investor and you're saying, okay, we think we need to have an operation in Europe, whether manufacturing or distribution, to access the European market. Well, if you're anywhere within the customs union, it means you're inside the tariff-free zone. And also, if you're inside the single market, it means that in terms of recruiting people from other countries and so on within the union, it plays into the choices that you make. So therefore, the United Kingdom, really, they did 3 things. So they left the European Union, they left the single market, and they left the customs union. They didn't have to. They could have just left the European Union and stayed in the other 2, but they chose not to. So we can go into that. I'll stop talking, and maybe you can decide where you want to take the next question.
Well, it sounded like you had a suggestion. What were you going to? What did you think flowed next?
Well, I suppose clarify maybe a little bit the position of the United Kingdom as it stands.
Yeah, so I think that would be great.
Yeah, I know you get a lot of confusion about, you know, what's England and what's Great Britain and what's United Kingdom and what's Ireland and what's Northern Ireland and all of this type of stuff. And a lot of the difficulties around the withdrawal agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union have to do with the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So maybe we'll just clarify what the United Kingdom is. I imagine some people have it clear, but there might be some confusion. So the full name of that country, if you like, is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So the island of Great Britain, which is England, Scotland, and Wales, and then a small piece of the island of Ireland called Northern Ireland belong to the United Kingdom. And that's the territory that left the European Union. Now, inside the European Union are 27 countries, and one of those countries is Ireland, so sometimes called the Republic of Ireland. So capital in Dublin, member of the European Union, sovereign state, uses the euro. And Ireland and Northern Ireland became separate actually 100 years ago today. There was a treaty signed between the Irish provisional government after the War of Independence in 1921. So the 6th of December 1921, Anglo-Irish agreement it was basically that the British would withdraw from Ireland, and an independent Irish state would be set up. And that soon after that, or slightly before that, Northern Ireland came into being, and Northern Ireland stayed inside the United Kingdom, and the independent Irish state, which at the time was called the Irish Free State, was now called the Republic of Ireland, or just Ireland, became independent. And that independent part of Ireland is now within the European Union. So the border between those two parts of Ireland, when both the United Kingdom and Ireland were part of the European Union, it wasn't a problem because you could have tariff-free trade flow across that. But once the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union, well, then the question arose, okay, so where is the customs border? Where is the free market border? Where can we control the movement of goods and people and so on? And because there was an agreement in 1998, some of you will remember there was a peace agreement to bring peace to Northern Ireland, which had been undergoing lots of trouble and violence at that time. The Good Friday Agreement, as it was called, virtually made that border invisible. So they were two different jurisdictions, but there was no infrastructure on the border. And both the European Union and the United Kingdom decided that they wanted to maintain that. So if the border controls were not inside the island of Ireland, between the two Irelands, where were they? Well, then they had to be between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is like between two parts of the United Kingdom. So in effect, although Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, de facto, it is within the single market and the customs union of the European Union. And that is what the argument is about at the moment, because the British government signed that agreement, but now are having some sort of buyer's remorse, and they want to renegotiate it. And the European Union says, well, we can't renegotiate it. We can negotiate facilities to make it easier to operate, but we're not going to renegotiate an international treaty that's taken us 4 years to get to, and which you signed 1 year ago. So we're not going to change it now. So that's the difficulty that's ongoing at the moment. In terms of supply chain, it's caused quite a lot of disruption, both for the United Kingdom itself and for the neighboring countries. So the United Kingdom, before it left the European Union, it did most of its trade with the European Union. So 43% of British exports went to the European Union, and 52% of their imports came from the European Union. And that was totally open and totally free. So you had lots of just-in-time supply chains, particularly in the automotive industry. So for example, you would have car assembly plants, some of them maybe in Germany, some in Belgium, some in Spain, some in Britain, and they might be working on various parts of the same vehicle and be sending parts back and forth, and the final assembly would be done in one or other of the countries. So those types of supply chains have been disrupted. Also, a lot of those imports into the United Kingdom from the European Union would be fresh produce, coming from the Mediterranean countries, particular fruit and vegetables and so on. And they have to be just in time also, they have to be fresh, and they're being held up as well. So there have been those practical problems that, mixed up with the COVID difficulties, have tended to exacerbate some of the shortages that have been happening everywhere, but they've been exacerbated within the United Kingdom because of Brexit. It's hard to disentangle right now what element of it is due to COVID and what element.
Yeah, unfortunately, the timing was so close to each other.
Yeah. In fact, the coming into effect of the measures, if you like, the effect of imposition of border controls on the European Union side for the British came into effect really on the 1st of January 2021. So during 2020, when COVID kicked off, some people thought that the British would ask for a delay on that, but they decided not to. They decided to forge ahead. So yeah, the two things kind of came on top of each other. But again, they didn't have to. They could have asked for an extension and it would have been granted, but they chose not to. So that's the situation we're in. What is very interesting from an Irish point of view and from an American point of view, because Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, which is the part of Ireland that's still within the European Union, has been one of the greatest beneficiaries over the last 30 or 40 years of foreign direct investment, inward investment from American companies in particular. So there's a ridiculous percentage of the inward American investment into the European Union has landed in Ireland. And the reasons for that to do with the low corporate tax rate, being English speaking, being in the European Union, being in the Euro, and being a place where I guess if American executives come to live and work here, it's easy for them because we speak the same language and the culture is, you know, more or less similar. So, you know, all the big American names are here, manufacturing, the likes of Pfizer, the likes of Gilead in pharmaceutical. A lot of the big tech companies are here. Intel is here, Apple is here, Microsoft is here, Facebook, you know, lots of these tech companies are here. And those that manufacture, because Ireland is a relatively small country of 5 million, most of what they manufacture is for export. And you can imagine a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in Ireland exporting to other parts of the European Union. The easiest way, the fastest way, logistically, is to use what's called the land bridge, which is you put your truck full of pharmaceuticals on a ferry, and the ferry goes across to Great Britain, drives across Great Britain, gets on another ferry and gets off in Belgium or France, and then goes on to European markets. And then also, if you have your factory and you're bringing in raw materials, so if you're the manufacturing plant and you're bringing in, I don't know, citric acid or lactose or whatever it is you're bringing in, and it's coming from continental Europe, it would use the land bridge to come in. And that was the way 80% of the movements in and out of Ireland happened. They came across Great Britain. And because Great Britain, part of the United Kingdom, was a member of the European Union, that, you know, it was free flow, it was no problem. Now they've left, there are checks and controls and delays. So what's happened is there's been an explosion of direct routes between Ireland and the mainland continent of Europe. So I'm talking, when I say explosion, I mean the number of routes have increased maybe 5 or 6-fold within less than a year. So starting from 1st of January this year, there's one port in Southeast Ireland where there used to be 6 crossings each, you know, between back and forth between Ireland and the continent of Europe. There are now somewhere between 30 and 40 on the same route. So there's been an increase. There's been almost a doubling of the volumes of freight moving from Ireland directly to the continent, and there's been a crash in the movement of freight going through Great Britain. Now it's still important because there are certain products that the direct route don't suit, but you've seen almost. It was very interesting to watch almost in real time how the supply chains literally reconfigured themselves within weeks and months in response.
So what kind of products would those be, Patrick, that the direct route doesn't suit, as you put it?
Probably fresh produce, stuff that's very.
Because it takes longer.
Very time sensitive. Yeah, it takes a bit longer.
What would be the difference in time, basically, like ballpark?
Well, actually, this is an argument. There's some routes where the difference is not that great. So sometimes it might be to do with whether certain products need to be accompanied, or.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because what has happened with the direct routes is that because it's a long ferry crossing where you don't need a driver. So when you put a trailer, I'm not talking about containers now, I'm talking about, you know, truck and trailer, you put it on a ferry in
Yep.
Ireland, it's probably going to take, depending which port you're going to, between 20, 24, 25, 28 hours to get to one of the mainland European ports like Le Havre or Zeebrugge or Antwerp or one of those. So you don't need the driver. So they're going unaccompanied, and then the trucking companies here are building strategic alliances with trucking companies on the other side who pick the trailer up when it arrives on the other side and drive it off. So people are discovering there are advantages to that,
Right.
and I guess this whole driver thing is another issue. In the United Kingdom before Brexit came into effect, a significant proportion of truck drivers in the United Kingdom were EU nationals from other countries other than the United Kingdom. So lots of drivers operating, living and working in the United Kingdom were from Poland or from Slovakia or from Latvia or Lithuania, countries like these. So lots of those guys went home, partly to do with Brexit and partly to do with COVID. And the problem is lots of them just didn't come back again. So the shortages,
we're having some problems like with that as well.
So the shortages, which are universal, we're having them here as well, but the shortages in the United Kingdom have been exacerbated because those drivers have not come back. And also, like if you've been in London, you go for a coffee someplace, most of the people working in cafes and bars and restaurants in London would have been from other parts of the European Union. Lots of those people have gone home as well. So lots of businesses in the hospitality sector in the United Kingdom are having great difficulty.
Well, why do they go home?
People to work. They went home because it's becoming more of a hostile environment for them to live. They need visas and they need work permits, and they
oh, I see.
some of them went home maybe to say, okay, well, if we're going to have lockdown, I'd rather be at home in Naples, where I come from, rather than being in lockdown in London, where I don't know anybody. So that kind of thing happened. And then when things opened up, they said, well, I'm not going back, because to go back now, I need this and I need the other. And so it's just too much trouble. So that has been a phenomenon. So if you like, they're suffering from the labor shortages that we're all suffering from, but then Brexit has added another layer to that, because lots of European nationals who were there are not there any longer.
Well, now, going back to the routes just for a minute here, I can see how the route to Ireland would be definitely different. Did any other routes have to change? No,
okay. Because if you think of the geography, so France, well, let's talk about, so I said to you earlier that the European Union was the United Kingdom's largest trading partner. Within that, individual countries, the biggest trading partners within the European Union, who trade with Britain, if you like, within Britain's top 10 individual countries. So if we just put the EU to one side and say, just look at the countries within it, of the top 10 of Britain's top 10 trading partners, 7 of them are European Union members. So you've got Germany, Netherlands, France, Ireland, as we spoke about, Spain, Belgium, and Italy. So the access to the UK from those countries other than Ireland, so Germany, Netherlands, France, Spain, Belgium, and Italy, is unchanged in terms of the routes, but it's not unchanged in terms of the regime that's in operation. So when you send product from the United Kingdom out to any one of those countries, there are customs checks and controls. Going the other way, going into the United Kingdom has chosen to implement grace periods. So they're not implementing yet the controls that they will eventually implement. So it's probably going to get more difficult than it is right now. But they've right for the moment, they're not implementing the controls and checks that they will eventually implement for all sorts of reasons. Some of them political, some of them practical. So that's yet to come. That's yet to be, and it will become a bit more difficult. So I guess
it'll probably be more like from the US to Canada.
Yeah,
perhaps?
I'm not sure exactly what the regulations are there, but yeah, the United Kingdom is a third country as far as the European Union is concerned, and the European Union is imposing the controls. So product coming here to Dublin from Britain across the water, which used to be free flowing, there are now checks and controls, and particularly in anything that has to do with food, phytosanitary controls and so on. And the same for anything going from Britain to any one of those mainland European countries that I mentioned. And the same controls should be in place the other way. It's just that the British have chosen not to implement them for the moment. So I guess if you're going to manufacture, you say, listen, I want to set up something in Europe, but I particularly want to access the British market, but I also want to access the European market, or the British market is not so important to me. I want to access the European market. Your choice of location for your investment, or for your partners, where you're going to find joint venture partners and so on, will be affected by lots of those situations as regards to what markets you're interested in and where you want to set up in order to have ease of access to diverse markets.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what types of products or which supply chains maybe are most affected by these changes in the EU? So go ahead.
Well, I guess the most significant one is probably the automotive industry, because, as I said, it was very integrated across different countries, so that you would have manufacturers who would have manufacturing plants in different countries, or they would have suppliers in different countries. So you get lots of suppliers of parts who would be in places like the Czech Republic or Slovakia, maybe even Poland. They're all members of the European Union, and they would have been sending parts, say, for assembly in the United Kingdom, and then that assembly or sub-assembly might be sent back to another European country, say Germany, for final assembly. So you had these supply chains that were depending on coordination to have parts kind of just in time to manage their inventory in an efficient manner, and they have been disrupted. Also, the food supply chains have been greatly disrupted, and in the United Kingdom, in supermarkets, lots of products have been delisted, particularly products that would be coming in small quantities, because it's just become too much trouble for that to happen. We've also experienced here in Ireland. So we have supermarket chains here which are homegrown. We have supermarket chains here whose origin is in the United Kingdom, and we have supermarket chains whose origin is in continental Europe, particularly Germany. So we would have Lidl and Aldi. Now, the British supermarkets have known, so Tesco, for example, is a large British supermarket chain, and lots of their stores here in Ireland, we've seen lots of products that have been delisted, because they would have their central distribution hubs inside the United Kingdom, and they've maybe chosen that certain products that are, not big sellers or big lines, they've just delisted them because it's too much trouble. Another interesting thing that we've seen is that here in Ireland is that when we would go onto Amazon to buy something, generally that would be fulfilled from an Amazon center in the United Kingdom. So we started to notice that we were being charged an import fee that was to do with the fact that this was now coming from outside the European Union. So Amazon has actually decided that they're not going to fulfill orders for Ireland from the United Kingdom any longer. And they're in the process of building a giant distribution center here in Dublin, which will open in a few short weeks, a few short months. So I guess from that point of view, Ireland has benefited from the investment of Amazon. And what I've seen here in terms of the reaction of supply chains here is an increase in inventory and an increase in demand for warehousing space, and an increase in building activity for warehouses here in Ireland. So there is a deficit because there's a lot of demand for high quality warehousing that is compatible with pharmaceutical, medical devices, food, and so on. And most of what was there and was good has been eaten up, and there's more and more demand, and there's a lag in the building process for that. So I guess everything that's happened from Brexit to COVID has tended to drive up inventory levels, and we're seeing that a lot. And I'm also seeing as well, as a consequence of both of those things, an increase in automation in distribution centers, which is associated with the lack of people to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're seeing quite a lot of that. In terms of the other countries that are impacted, so I mentioned France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, and so on. So those, if you think about it, particularly France and Germany, but also to a certain extent Belgium and the Netherlands. Those are larger economies than Ireland, and their, if you like, the impact of their dealings with the United Kingdom, while important in relative terms to their overall cake, if you like, is not as important. So if you had a league of the European Union countries most affected by Brexit, Ireland would be at the top of that league, then probably followed by Belgium and Netherlands and maybe France. But curiously enough, Ireland has done tremendously well because it seems to be benefiting from some businesses that are exiting the United Kingdom, like financial services. Some of those countries or some of those companies that were maybe in the city of London and they're looking for another English-speaking base, but within the European Union, have wound up coming to Dublin. And we've already spoken about the Amazon example. And because Brexit was, the process started maybe in 2015, the referendum was in 2016. So around 2015, lots of Irish companies said this could be a problem, and they started working on diversification. So by the time it actually came to pass, lots of exporters here were quite diversified. So the economy here has done tremendously well this year, and growth is really strong. Employment is strong. Tax take is really strong. So despite everything, it's done quite well. The other European countries, as I said, mainland European countries of France, Belgium, Holland, their supply chains are impacted, but also they have benefited also. So I've seen examples of British companies who had important customer bases in continental European countries, and because the fulfillment or the servicing of their customers in the continent of Europe, in France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, and so on, became so difficult, what they actually did was they set up distribution centers in those countries. So in a way, they have benefited from British inward investment, because certain British companies, in order to continue to have ease of access, have chosen to actually set up an entity within the European Union. So that is that is some of what's going on. And you may be saying, well, you know, Patrick's not really describing any benefits of Brexit for the British, and I don't really see any. Now they have, if you think in political terms, for the people who wanted Brexit, and they argued that it was a sovereignty issue. Well, I guess they have that, but there's not a lot of business or tangible financial benefits with it. They said as well that they wanted it to be able to do their own free trade deals, particularly with the United States. So there doesn't seem to be much likelihood of that. The Biden administration doesn't particularly seem to be much interested in a free trade deal with the United Kingdom at the moment, and probably might be a bit more favorable to a free trade deal with the European Union, because at the end of the day, the economy of the European Union is 8 or 9 times the size of the British economy, even after Brexit. So that hasn't quite worked out. And then the other free trade deals that they wanted to do around the world, they've not made a lot of headway on that. They've really just rolled over agreements that they already had as a member of the European Union with certain countries around the world. So it's hard to see in practical economic terms what benefit they've had out of it. Certainly not to date. I don't know whether at some point in the future that will come to pass. But I guess anybody who wants to look at trade figures between any pair of countries, most countries do most of their trade with their closest neighbors. So if you leave a free trade area with your closest neighbors and you want to replace that with trade with countries that are further away, that's a difficult ask.
Right. All right. That's true. There is definitely more trade with it sounds, some of what you described sounds a bit like our trade with the US's trade with Mexico and Canada. So to your point, they are closer.
Yeah. You will do most of your trade with those two countries. That makes sense. In the same way that, as I said, the United Kingdom did most of its trade with European Union countries.
Right. Well, so what about the pandemic? What do you see? Let's go to Europe overall, and Europe and just overall. What changes have you seen happening with COVID taking place, and what do you see where folks are thinking about or investing for 2022, and what they should be watching for?
Well, I guess when you look at Europe in terms of COVID, a little bit like in the United States, where I understand that, you know, health matters are handled at state level in the United States. The same here in Europe. The health policies are handled at the national level. So, for example, the measures to combat COVID in a country, say like Bulgaria, which is a member of the European Union, would be very different from Italy, would be different from Ireland, would be different from France. So what we have seen is a kind of a divide between Eastern Europe and Western Europe in terms of the uptake of vaccination. So the countries that have had the highest uptake of vaccination are countries like Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, Ireland, Denmark. Surprisingly, Germany is lower. Austria is lower again. And then Eastern European countries, so countries like Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on, have had quite a poor uptake. So you're talking, some of them might be even 50% or even lower, whereas some of those other countries I mentioned, the high ones are up in the 90s of the adult population. And right now the booster shots are underway. So Ireland, so Europe right now is kind of I think the WHO's, the World Health Organization, announced that we're kind of the center of the pandemic again. There's been another surge. So countries are introducing new controls and measures. And some of those measures in some countries translate in effect into a lockdown for the unvaccinated, so that if you're unvaccinated, there are lots of things that you can't do because you have to have a digital vaccination certificate, which is a standard model across the European Union. And if you don't have it in certain countries, you can't go to a restaurant, or you can't get in a ski lift, or you can't get on a bus, or different things. And that varies from place to place. So I guess the how well things are holding up is a function of the level of vaccination.
And how has it affected the supply chain?
It's affected the supply chain in terms of availability of labor. So most countries are experiencing shortages for different reasons, because people are they're either infected, or they're close contacts and they're isolating, or they are choose not to go to work. So it's having an impact on warehousing, it's having an impact on transport, and it's having an impact on the retail sector in a big way. So what I have seen is, because we had some lockdowns here that were very, very heavy and very, very long, and some clients of mine in the retail sector, their high street sales went to zero for months because their shops were closed. But what happened was their online sales skyrocketed. So they had 10 years growth in literally 2 months in their online business while their shops were closed. And then when the shops opened again, the e-commerce came back, but it didn't come back to where it was. So the e-commerce is still kind of 2-3 times as high as it was before the COVID lockdowns. So what has happened is that many of them have taken strategic decisions to reconfigure their physical operations in warehouses. So I'm working on a number of projects where just this thing has happened. And some of them, if you like, were dabbling in e-commerce, but they never really thought through operationally what it meant. And if you think about it in a warehouse, if you're picking an order to replenish your shop on Main Street, so your shop will send you a replenishment order, and there might be several dozen lines in the order, and each line in the order requires several units. So you've got one order, maybe 30 lines, and maybe say 3 or 4 items per line. So one order, you're going to go out into the warehouse, you're going to do a pick walk, you're going to pick 120 items, you're going to pack them, put them on a pallet and send them to the shop, right? Now, what's happening, those 120 items are coming from the end user through the website. So now it's B2C. These people are ordering one line orders, maybe 2. So maybe I'll have a pair of shoes and a pair of socks, but I just want one pair of shoes and one pair of socks. So now my 120 items might be 60 orders, or it might be 80 orders. So I've got to go and pick and pack 80 orders. So they didn't quite understand the full, particularly when they were dabbling in it, the full operational implications of that. So when all of a sudden the shop orders went to zero and the e-commerce orders went through the roof, they couldn't get the people to fulfill the orders. So there was also delays, shortage of people, bringing in all sorts of people, students, part-timers, family members, all of this going on. And some companies and clients of mine decided they weren't going to go through that again. And they've realized that the e-commerce element of their business is here to stay as a phenomenon. And they have decided to put their hand in their pocket and invest in changing their processes and introducing a lot more automation and systems into their distribution centers. And I'm conducting.
I'm seeing the same. A lot of that is happening here as well.
And what's happening out of that? So we're conducting a number of selection processes whereby we're having the systems vendors provide proposals and quotations to automate these distribution centers. So, you know, some of the names would be familiar also in the US, like Dematic or Mitsubishi or Bastian Automation, Knapp, TGW, all of these people. And what we're finding with them is they now have very long lead times, because they're getting that same demand that we're putting on them is coming at them from lots of different directions. Right. So now to get a vendor, systems integrator, to commit to implement a solution for you within the next year and a half is very, very difficult. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of activity, and those guys are going to be really busy for the next 2 to 3 years, I think.
Absolutely. And how about, do you have the same phenomenon that we have in the US? And that is, there's a lot of interest in reshoring and nearshoring production. Do you have anything like that going on in Europe?
Yeah, we do have that going on. So I have clients particularly clients that are big importers and distributors of products, but also manufacturers who procure raw materials far and wide. So a couple of anecdotes. I have a client is a large pharmaceutical manufacturer. They manufacture an analgesic product that's quite well known, and the active ingredient, they had 2 main suppliers, one in East Asia and one in Southern Asia, South Asia. And when the restrictions came in, the early restrictions, for example, the Indian government imposed an export ban across the board, and caused a lot of fright. So they did have a strategic stock here that they were working on, but it would only last for some weeks. So they had to pull out all the stops. They had to get diplomats involved between the different countries to try to get supplies. So they resolved to find duplicate supply for that within the European Union, albeit more expensive. I've seen distribution clients of mine, whether in furniture, apparel, and so on, who would have been dependent on East Asia and Southeast Asia and South Asia for imports. And I've seen evidence of them shifting sources of supply to countries like Turkey, like Russia, like Morocco, and then also inside the European Union to places like Portugal and Spain, and countries of Eastern Europe that are within the European Union. So that shift is going on. I think we will end up with more regionalized supply chains in the medium term. I don't think we're going to go backwards in globalization as such. It's going to be a new form of globalization. It's not necessarily bringing things home, it's bringing them closer to home. And also, I think it will probably involve quite a bit more investment in technology and automation. And then I guess in terms of global interactions, over intercontinental global interactions, I think in the digital space that will continue, and it will grow because it's not as dependent on physical supply chains. And I think also that process of reshoring or nearshoring or regionalization of physical supply chains was underway before COVID, and it was driven by environmental considerations, it was driven by technological considerations, it was driven by geopolitical considerations and some of the tensions with countries in East Asia, China, US is one example. So that process was there already. And I've seen examples as well of companies in Europe. Say, for example, one I'm well aware of is one that makes designer frames for glasses, and they used to have their products manufactured in East Asia. So the designs were developed in Italy, and the manufacturing was done in, well, I can't remember which Asian country, but one Asian country. And they are now leveraging 3D printing at different areas in Europe to print those products close to point of use, whether in Barcelona or in Rome or in Paris. So that's a trend that we're seeing as well.
Yeah, 3D printing is a really good point. The same is happening here as well. I was interested by what you said, like it was happening before anyway, that trend. And one of the reasons you listed is environmental. So is that because there was a lot of transportation time between the two?
Yeah, well, I guess one is the transportation time, and the other is, this concept of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 emissions. And companies, particularly companies that have a big consumer presence, are coming under a lot of pressure from consumers and from regulators in terms of their emissions. And if you have a very complex supply chain into faraway places that you have no visibility of, that's going to become more and more of a problem. So that's one element of it. And the other element of it is the efficiency of production in those countries, as well as the transport element. So all of those things, I think, were coming together, and particularly the companies that are more sensitive to that were being driven to a degree by environmental considerations. What has happened since then? I think COVID has made climate change more real in a way. I don't know whether it is that, particularly here in the Western world, we kind of thought about these really bad things that happen, but they always happen somewhere else, right? But now COVID happened right here. And now we're seeing people go, okay, so really bad things can happen, and they can happen here. And now we've seen, for example, in the US, you've had fires and hurricanes and so on, and there were major floods in parts of Germany this year in the summer, in Europe, places that people were totally taken by surprise that this could actually happen here. So I think these things have made people and business people, politicians, kind of realize that this is real, and it's happening here. And we've had the IPCC, we've had COP26, and we've had a lot of although I know lots of environmentalists maybe are disappointed with the outcome, but there has been real change. There has been legislation passed in countries, particularly in European countries. That means countries are committed not just to pay lip service, but they're committed legally to cut emissions very drastically by 2030, and then again by 2050. And I think all of that now, which was already there, particularly for the more sensitive companies, is now becoming generalized across companies all over and in all sectors. And one of the ones that's in the crosshairs, well, two actually, is the agricultural sector and the transport sector. So, for example, the agricultural sector, between fertilizers and methane, particularly in beef or dairy producing countries, of which Ireland is quite a significant producer. Methane is one of our biggest issues. And then the transport industry, because it's quite challenging to green the transport industry. You can have battery powered vans for urban delivery, but it's not quite there yet in terms of HGVs covering long distances, 400 or 500 miles. But that's coming as well. So I've been doing quite a bit of research and formal study in relation to what's going to happen with regard to alternative sources of energy for the transport industry. And there's a lot going on there. I think the transport industry and the logistics industry in 5 years' time, in terms of its energy supply, and certainly in 10 years' time, will not look very much like it looks today. So there's a lot of change happening there. I understand also in terms of ocean freight, we've been doing quite a lot of work in ocean freight because companies have been enduring huge price rises. But I understand some of the large shipping companies have new generations of ships coming online, particularly from 2023 onwards, which will be far more efficient in terms of their energy sources. So there's quite a lot of capacity. I understand something like 20% of the global fleet may be replaced by 2023.
Yeah, lots of changes to come. So I guess with that said, is there any last thoughts that you'd like to leave us with to summarize, either what's happening in Europe, or what do you see? Maybe we leave it with a prediction. Is there anything that from that point of view?
Well, I guess there's a reality that economies in Europe seem to be weathering the storm quite well. The American companies, I think, looking to invest into Europe shouldn't change their plans. There are lots of opportunities. In terms of a prediction, let's see. What should we go for? Should we go for what will happen? What will happen with Brexit? What will happen with COVID? where should I?
What happened with the supply chain related? In Europe, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see lots of reconfiguration. We're going to see a very strong greening of the supply chain in Europe. The supply chain in Europe is already quite green in comparison to other parts of the world, but I think we're going to see serious changes in that respect. We'll have mode shift from road to rail. We'll have mode shift from road to short sea shipping routes, and we will have huge initiatives in terms of efficiency with current energy sources, particularly in logistics and transport, and we will see a move to alternative fuels, whether e-fuels, biofuels, green hydrogen, and electric battery power, and I think that's going to happen quite quickly in Europe between now and 2030.
Interesting. Well, yes, thank you, Patrick. That's been a fascinating discussion. So we ought to be able to take that and be thinking about it, because many of these same topics are happening here, and we're reconfiguring supply chains, as we speak. So this will be good to understand what's going on in another part of the world. So we appreciate you joining us today.
Very welcome. You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yes. Well, thank you, Patrick. And before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about the next webinar in our webinar series. We're going to get together again on January 14th, and we're going to be joined with John Descari, who's going to talk about the ports and the state of logistics. He's an expert, been involved with the ports, for countless numbers of years here. If there's ever a topic that everyone continues to be concerned about, is what's happening with the ports and why can't we get things through the ports and what's going on. So we'll answer that question in our January webinar series. So hopefully you continue to join us then. And we also at Apex Inland Empire and the Association for Supply Chain Management, we're going to have a member appreciation and a kickoff to the new year in person. So that'll be an exciting event. We're going to send that out shortly in January. So stay tuned for that. And thank you again, Patrick, for joining us.
Very welcome, Lisa. It's been a pleasure. Keep well.